Hi, everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope everyone is doing great tonight. Our main topic is traveling in 1760. So let me know how your travels have been here lately while you're journeying to the past. Let me know how you're doing on your journey and say hi to me and let me know how you're doing. That's the main thing. Before we get started tonight, I want to share just a few things that is going on here. Um, the month of March has been a little bit crazy, just like the previous months before. We were able to get our attic file surnames list up on the website. So they are available for viewing. You can visit PiedmontTrails.com and hit the family attic files, and it will show you the new list of what we have on hand. Um, Over time, we will be adding to these files and they'll show up on our online library. So we're looking forward to adding to the files. But right now, that is our current list of what files we have available. Also, show number 49 on our podcast, we weren't able to get that out by the 15th of this month. So that will be coming out in April. We're not going to give a date on when that's going to come out. We are going to surprise everyone. So we're going to leave that up on our website announcing that. It'll be concerning the Mecklenburg Declaration in Charlotte, North Carolina, prior to the American Revolutionary War. And we're going to share our findings from that. This was the last project that we were working on before the hurricane hit. So we're hoping to get that show aired next month and share our findings from that research. Things have been a little bit chaotic. We were able to keep a local live presentation for a local historical society this month. We were able to complete that. And get the attic files surname list up. But other things were kind of put on hold. We had some repairs going on here at our home and at Piedmont Trails, and we had a bridge that was replaced. So now that bridge has been replaced, and we're all good on that. And maybe, hopefully, it'll hold tight and for the rains to come that they keep saying we're going to get over this coming week. So say hi to me. Let me know you're here. Just want to say apologies to everyone for not being able to stay on schedule between work and repairs going on and other things, prior commitments. We've just not been able to stay up to schedule and trying to get our podcast shows out once a month and our articles. And so we have been running a little bit behind, but please bear with us. Thank you so much for your patience and your support. We greatly appreciate it. And just hang in there. Hopefully, April will be much better where we can stay on schedule and get things posted on the website and share more with you guys. Let's hope so. We all hope so. So Melissa's with us. Hi, Melissa. And we got two Melissas. Melissa from New York is here. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. All right, so we're going to get started with tonight's topic, which is traveling in 1760. And before I go much further, I want you guys to feel free to share your knowledge, share your family stories with me, share your questions. I'll do the best of my ability to answer them. I was hoping that tonight I'd be able to share my screen and some of my documents and maps and things that we've been working on with the Great Wagon Road Project and other projects. I haven't been able to upgrade our software yet. I have to get another computer for that. So we're in the process of doing that. And so I hope that all of that will be coming up next month for the next live stream. Let's hope so. Let's hope April's going to be the month. So by that time, because I want to share a lot of our maps and things that we've been working on with the project and shows documents and other things. Okay. So I chose the year 1760 because of so many events happened in that decade that defined the future course of the 13 colonies. And I know for us who have families who were living during this time period, I know that each and every one of these events affected our ancestors in some way. And I also chose 1760 for another reason, because in accordance to our research with the Great Wagon Road Project, this was the peak years, the high point of the years of inland migration. So, in other words, we see more of the population traveling after 1760 and prior to 1770 on the major migration routes heading south or west during this time period. And there's a reason for that. There's several reasons for that. So I think most people who are researching their families and trying to determine when was the exact date that they left or were migrating, they're going to find that the majority of them migrated between 1760 and 1770. So that was the main reasons why I chose this particular date. And I wanted to share the importance of what had happened and what events took place and how they could have affected our families, and what, if any, of these events really made the ultimate choice, made them decide, hey, it's time for us to go, we're moving, and did it also affect their decision on where their destination would be. For many of these families, they wanted to travel south, although there were some that decided to travel west, regardless of the Proclamation Act that came into effect by 1763. And we'll get into more about that. The morale, this is the other thing that made me want to choose 1760 for tonight. The morale and the character of the social standards of the day during this period changed. In other words, the tide kind of shifted. The colonies had been organized for some time. For most families, they were born in the colonies, although, we still have many, many immigrants sailing from other countries arriving to the colonies. But we were working on second and sometimes third generations in the British colonies at this time. So the morale of the people and their mindsets were changing. And I think a great deal of this pertains to the events that happened in this decade. So share your thoughts and let me know too what you think. And Ella Ransom is here. Hello, Miss Carol. Hello. That's so happy that you could join us this evening. All right. So the first event that I wrote down for tonight was by 1760, the Cherokee were, during 1758, 1759, and 1760, they were very active in the Carolinas, Western Carolina, the Piedmont section of Carolina, North Carolina, and ranging into the Piedmont section of South Carolina. And they were traveling into Tennessee, eastern parts of there, and into the western and mid sections of Virginia. So a smallpox epidemic had broke out, and according to many documents, one of the main documents that proved this is the Moravian documents, where it offered evidence of so many people that were affected by the smallpox during this particular time, especially in the spring of 1759. And I think the Cherokee were also affected, along with other various local tribes, such as the Catawba. I think due to this, in the ongoing tensions between the settlers who were arriving into the Piedmont area of North Carolina and extending their boundaries over as far west as Catawba River and even farther into present-day Morganton, along the Johns River, and so forth. And I think the tensions arose to where the Cherokee were now attacking certain farms and small settlements and families. And by 1760, a great deal of the tension between the settlers and the Cherokee had dwindled. And there was more talk of more trading was going on during this particular time. There were more interactions with the settlers during this time, and those tensions, they settled. And by 1760, word had got around that the Cherokee were no longer attacking these families in these particular areas. Trade, for the most part, it stopped for a couple of years. There were many families who were living in the Piedmont area, North Carolina, who fled the area during this time period because of the attacks had gotten so bad in certain areas, or maybe their family members were affected by it. And then by 1760 and 1761, they returned back to their lands, and we find evidence of this. So we think this is a primary event that would have caused it would have caused them to maybe decide, hey, it's time to go back, or now we can go, let's go into North Carolina. I think this would have been an event that would have caused them to make a decision like that. So number 2, I wrote down the French and Indian War, or what others would refer to as the 7 Years' War, was coming to a close. And by 1762, France, they ceded Louisiana to Spain, okay? And by 1763, a peace treaty is signed, and Canada and the American Midwest becomes part of the 13 colonies. And I think that was a big decision. Many of the families, many of our ancestors who were here during the 7 Years' War, French Indian War, participated in that. So, yes, I think that decision would have affected them greatly. By May 1763, we have Chief Pontiac, who disagrees with the treaty from the French and Indian War. And the result of this is Pontiac's rebellion, which that would be reflected upon Pennsylvania and Ohio, lands located in Michigan, all the way up to present-day Canada and into the Ohio Valley. So families thinking of moving in this direction, or maybe they had possibly temporarily settled more closely in that area, would have moved elsewhere. Or maybe they were thinking about doing it, and then Pontiac's rebellion came about. No, we're going to move south instead. King George III issues the Proclamation Act of 1763 prohibiting settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. And you don't find this. And according to our research, what we have came across is people are more rebellious during this time period. They don't necessarily adhere to the present day law by King George III. They travel way beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And we've proven this with our research in Tennessee when we were studying in the state of Franklin, areas of Western Virginia. Many people did that early, or very early. So even before the 1763 Proclamation Act. And I think afterwards, people just did not adhere to the rules. This is where I see a shift in the morale of people and how they actually think about London, England, the Great Britain being their mother country versus their own individual colony being their own country. And I'll get more into that in a second. Let's share your thoughts on that. And the next event I wrote down was in 1764, we've got the Sugar Act that comes into play. And in 1765, we've got the Stamp Act, which in the following year, the Stamp Act is repealed. But in 67, you've got the Townsend's Act that comes into play. All of this is repealed too because people, the colonists, rebelling against these additional taxes. So the one that really remains is the tea tax. And I think all of this plays a factor into our ancestors' decisions. Change was in the air, and the people responded to this in various ways. We think that beginning in 1760 was the most heavily migration period during the 18th century. For those making plans to migrate elsewhere, what did they take? What did they take with them? How did they travel? Who did they travel with? And which route did they take? And what did they experience along the way? Tell me what you think. So I was just going to catch up on chat here too. Just got in, missed the proclamation line of 1763. Yeah, it was one of the events that I think created decisions that our ancestors had to make prior to migrating during this heavily most populated time period of when inland migration took place. And So now we're going to get into the hows, the whys, the wheres, and how did it all come about? So why did they decide to migrate elsewhere? Why? To truly understand, their decisions, you're going to have to investigate each case separately. In other words, if say you've got 18th century families that traveled or migrated, say for instance, from Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, they migrated south. Some of your family members settled in Virginia. You had maybe one or two families living in South Carolina, maybe a couple in Georgia. And I would suggest that you research each of these families separately to find out why they migrated, because each decision for each family, it was various reasons. It was different for each one. And we see this time and time and again, each time we research these families as they migrated on the Great Wagon Road and other routes. There are all kinds of reasons why they left. For some, it was land, of course. You can't leave that out. Others, it was freedom. And we can't disregard, for many colonial indentured servants were living in Pennsylvania. Maybe they have gained their freedom during this time period, but now they have very limited means, and maybe they need a fresh new start. Maybe now they have found a way to migrate south. Just possibilities here, just giving you ideas. The list goes on and on. Maybe personal prosperity. Maybe they were looking into business prospects. Maybe they got in touch with have a new business partner. Maybe they're going on a new adventure. Maybe it's even criminal activity. Have run across that. I kid you not. Believe me, the reasons for leaving vary from one household, from one family, from one person to another. It changes. So what did they take with them? What did they take? Only the bare necessities and the items that they could not live without, no matter what. The bare necessities. That's what Melissa says. She says they probably took only necessities. Yes, you're right. Unless they had the means to own several wagons, okay? Large items like furniture were either left behind, given to a friend, or sold prior to leaving. They took tools, they took clothing, food, and small items, things that they would definitely need to start brand new in their new home, their new area. What did they need for, if they did have a wagon, what tools were necessarily to go for on the wagon? Well, they definitely needed an axe to clear fallen trees and things of that nature, okay, that were blocking the road. They needed tar, okay, to lubricate the wheels, keep the axles going. They also needed a wagon jack, most definitely. If they were lucky enough to have a Conestoga wagon or a work wagon, farm wagon, then that's what they would definitely need. But I think only the bare necessities. We have ran across families who sailed along the Atlantic coast to points and places in Virginia and North Carolina, and had their furniture came down inland by their servants and other people, other family members. We have seen that. We have seen evidence of that. Each family's different on this. It depends on what available funds they have available and what wagons they would have had available to them. If a Conestoga wagon required 3 teams of horses at least to travel over this rough terrain. And it's not as rough during the 1760 decade as it was prior to 1729 when we first found our first group traveling, all the way through the next decades. The roads automatically widen. They automatically, in most cases, get better. The maintenance on them seems to be better in certain areas. So by 1760, you've got so many different routes to choose from. So it's just depends on their means and how much funds they have available to them, and what items they felt that they had to have. Only the bare necessities, I think. So how did they travel? If they had the money to own a wagon and a good team of horses, this would be their home for the next weeks or a few months ahead. If they owned a Conestoga wagon, they would need 3 teams of horses to pull it, but they would be able to take more items with them to help with a fresh start. Okay? We have found that most families traveled by carts or what we call a working wagon. Working wagon. These were much smaller in size, but they were easier to maneuver over rough terrain, rocky soil, rocks, steep inclines. All families carried a hemp canvas. Okay, no matter what, if they were rolling a cart or had a little 2-wheel cart or a working wagon or a Conestoga wagon, they had a hemp canvas that was waterproof, and in order to make them waterproof, they were soaked in linseed oil. And many carried their possessions. Sometimes many of them walked. And there were several who packed horses, and they traveled this way. It is during this period that we find several families selling along the coastline as well. So that gives you the options of how many different ways they had to migrate from the middle colonies or northern colonies down to the southern ones during this time period. And a great many of them did walk. A great many of them did ride horses and pack their own horses and stuff. Christy says, so happy to see you back. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're happy to be back. We're not back 110%, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Slowly but surely. Okay, so who did they travel with? This gets into the fun part of your research. For the most part, families traveled with other family members, or we also find them traveling with friends and neighbors. We have found entire church congregations, an entire church in Delaware. We came across this where the whole congregation departed together, and they migrated south together, and they settled in southern sections of North Carolina and northern sections of South Carolina close together. Whole congregation. For the most part, a plan was in place months or at least weeks prior to before they departed on their trip. And they would know who they're going to travel with. They would already made these plans. They would know what items they were going to take and when they were going to leave and what their destination would be. A lot of times, this is the fun part, I think, in researching this, is finding out who they traveled with, because it tells so much about these people and where they came from. And for the most part, for those that settled close to one another, they built entire communities, brand new settlements, new towns where they decided to stop. And they are the lifeline of that new settlement. It's because of them that the little settlement existed. So, and it's surprising on how some members of the original group would separate. And this could happen for various reasons. It could happen for sickness or death in that family, equipment failure, all kinds of different reasons. They could have changed their mind of their destination or where they were going. And it's fun to find these groups where they traveled and then where they separated, and they may have never saw each other again. So this is where it comes into the interesting part of the research, where you get to know more about the people themselves and their personalities, who they traveled with. Ellie says, were those Baptists or Welsh Baptists, Carol? From Delaware? They were Welsh Baptists, as a matter of fact. Very interesting you asked that. Yeah, it was a whole congregation traveled. Yep, all the way to North Carolina and northern sections of South Carolina. So what route did they travel? By 1760, you probably remember me saying there are all kinds of roads available, all kinds of different routes available by 1760. It's not like you're traveling in 1740s and 1750s anymore, where you've got only 2-3 major routes that will carry you from point A in Pennsylvania or in the middle colonies all the way south. Now, by 1760, you've got all kinds of routes to choose from. And there are a few routes traveling west. You want to go west? There are routes traveling south, and now they're extending all the way into southern Georgia and even points further west from there. Now there you have all kinds of destinations to choose from, all kinds of routes. She says, those are my ancestors. Cool. That's awesome, Ellie. Thank you for sharing that. That is cool. So they had choices on the roads that they took. And this was just a few years before toll roads come into view. And toll roads really play a major part in Virginia. They really do. And how people chose on how to travel after toll roads came into existence. Because it affected certain times of the year when they traveled as well. Toll roads played a major, major role. But in 1760, this is before toll roads really came into effect, especially in Virginia. So you had all kinds of roads to take, all kinds. At some point, they may change their routes due to new shortcuts that they have heard about as they're traveling through. They may change their destinations due to news received along the road. You don't know. Part of the group may separate completely, and others may settle along the way, while the rest of the group continues to travel onward. And we've seen this too. We have found several families staying in Virginia for a little while the others would continue forward. They would continue onward. And maybe years later, portions of that family that stayed in Virginia then they traveled later into the area where their family settled. We have seen that many times. So if you have questions about the routes, let me know. We have already presented a great deal of information about the 18th century roads on previous streams, but this decade, 1760, witnessed the most traffic migrating south than ever before. No doubt about that. You can tell that also in the population in the colonies, in the individual colonies in Southern Virginia, in North Carolina, South Carolina, and even Georgia. So if you have questions about the routes, let me know. I'll do my best to answer them. I wanted to be able to share my maps and stuff with you on this part, but I'll answer them the best way that I can. So what did they experience along the way? Of course, this varies from person to person, but we can honestly say that they all witnessed beauty among nature as they traveled through, okay, at some point, and they all witnessed sunny blue skies at some point during their trip. This was not a vacation for them by any means. These families could be placed in a life or death situation at any moment. At any moment. One of the diaries that I was looking at about a couple hours prior to coming on live was where a young boy was bitten by a rattlesnake along the trip and fell into, he was very, very sick. I was trying to remember if I remember a name, but anyway, his parents were very worried. They were unable to continue the trip with the group. The group decided not to stay, and so they continued onward. And I was trying to find in this diary if the young boy had lived, but the person who had written the diary did not express because they were the ones who traveled onward. So things like that would happen. It was still of a sort of a frontier in 1760 in central Virginia and eastern Virginia. You still had wild animals such as that could cause havoc, disrupt your lives, disrupt your trip. But, and you still had rough terrain. You still had the steep inclines. You had the rough roads, the muddy weather played a major part. But it was a lot different. You had a lot more help. How do I want to word this? Let's see. Say, for instance, during the 1740 decade, along the Great Wagon Road, it was very, very few tenants, people who lived along the road, especially the further south that you went. Once you got past Winchester, in that area, crossing the Shenandoah River in Augusta County, then you would be remote. Okay. Help wouldn't be readily available for you. 1760, on most of these major migration routes, you had someone who was less than a mile, 2 miles away from you who could come to your aid if needed. You could seek shelter during a storm. If a storm came upon you while you were traveling, there would be a plantation house or a cabin close by where you could take shelter. A family would let you take shelter. One of the diaries, gentleman traveling, said that he was not even given, he was given a head over his, a roof over his head during a storm overnight, but he wasn't given a blanket. And he was so infested with insects and creepy crawly things over him all night long that he barely slept a wink. But he got up early the next morning and was able to travel on. So he was just venting about his overnight stay at a particular home along the route when a storm came up. So things of this nature, you would have more help during this decade versus the earlier decades. The groups that were traveling during 1740s, 1750s, and even earlier were pretty much on their own. And it was a much more dangerous trip versus in 1760. Population, it goes way up. And you've got to, I've always said this, people, when they move and migrate to new areas, they settle near major roads first. They do that first. And so you're going, if you follow the roads, you'll find the people. That's what I've always said. Okay. So this was not a vacation by any means. These families, they witnessed all kinds of experiences. For the most part, weather and sickness seemed to be the most two important things that they would have had to withstood. But many experienced equipment failure and many experienced theft while traveling. Major reason why they're traveling in groups. There was a lot of theft that occurred on these migration routes. They knew that these people had everything that they pretty much owned traveling with them. And they considered them, if a family was traveling by themselves, they would be an easy target during the colonial period of attacking and robbing them and even murdering them. Not unheard of. All kinds of stories out there. So there have been all kinds of experiences along the way. By 1760, the news of land in the Carolinas was well known and talked about. Everybody knew about them. Many people already knew family or friends who had made the trip years before. Okay. Maybe they had received letters or they knew of a relative who had traveled years before and had settled in North Carolina and they were doing well. And maybe this enticed them to make the decision by 1760 to travel and migrate south. This second wave of migration set the stage for the American Revolutionary War, and I believe, that due to the population growth during this period in the southern colonies, it affected the outcome of the American Revolution so that independence was completely won. I wholeheartedly believe that. If it wasn't for the new roads, okay, and all the other events that took place during this particular decade, this second migration wave may never have happened, or maybe it may have happened decades later. And then maybe the American Revolutionary War outcome would have been completely different. Something to think about. I want to share something from a Reverend Andrew Burnaby. His name is Burnaby. His diary you can find online tonight, and you can read it. And I encourage you all to do this. He traveled during Virginia a few months in 1759, and then he traveled in the spring of the year in 1760. And his view of what he shares in his diary, and you can find it on archive.org, and I'm going to give you the title of it. The views that he shares is very, very interesting. Very interesting. And if you have ancestors who you suspect traveled during these years, I wholeheartedly want you to read that diary. It's amazing. But I want to share just a few things Um, let me say something about him first before I do that. He was born in 1732, okay? He's a Reverend Andrew Burnaby. He's an English clergy. He dies in 1812. He just happens to travel to Virginia during 1759 and 1760. His account of the area is documented with brand new eyes. He does not live in Virginia. He was not born in Virginia. He's never been to the colonies before. So he has brand new eyes looking upon the landscape of how it appears during this time period. He is born in Asfordby, okay, and he studied at Queen's College in Cambridge before sailing to Virginia. He later returns to London, and he dies in Kent by 1812. I find his diary interesting because he doesn't choose a side while he's traveling, as the colonies are changing. All the colonies are changing during this decade, but he doesn't choose a side. He doesn't say, let me read further and I'll explain it better. He doesn't choose a side while traveling as the colonies are changing. He simply notes and records what his senses are inspiring him to write. This allows us to revisit 1760 and see for ourselves what it was really like in one area from another. It's amazing. So I'm going to read just a few things of what he shared. Now, he departs from Williamsburg, Virginia, and he describes the scenery in Williamsburg during 1759. And he states that most houses out here are equipped. They're equipped with lightning rods, and one rarely hears about lightning fires due to them. He describes many rods or show melting or signs of melting or they've been hit, but he says it saved the home. It saved the dwelling. He also remarks on the tobacco fields and how many there are. And he remarks about the fertile soil that he finds in Virginia. He also describes Indian cornfields in detail. He also goes further in talking about pigeon berries. How many of you know what pigeon berries are? Or rattlesnake root. He describes the waterways and the iron mines to the west. He also goes into detail about Spotswood's iron mine and Chiswell's copper mine in detail. It was during this time that clergy were required to be paid with currency in Virginia instead of tobacco or other items, as they had done previously. And Burnaby describes the negative response that he hears from the citizens over this issue, but he doesn't take a side. He writes this objectively, and that's why I love his diary so much in this area. He notes that many people believe the colonies are separate states. This is in 1760. And he doesn't consider, and that they don't consider, the citizens of Virginia don't consider themselves connected so much with Great Britain. And he notes that. He notes how they rely on themselves and they consider themselves a separate entity. They're not, we know we're part of Great Britain, but they don't need anything from Great Britain. They sees a separation there in 1760. Reverend Burnaby departs Williamsburg on October 1st, 1759, and he travels 40 miles that first day, 40 miles. The next day it rains, and they travel 20 miles before stopping at a plantation where they stay overnight. And actually, they ended up staying overnight in the following day due to the rain. So by October 4th, they leave out, and Burnaby heads out to Fredericksburg, and he reaches Fredericksburg by nightfall. As he continued, he passed by Colonel Washington's property. He loves Colonel Washington's property, and he describes it from a distance in detail on how the countryside looked and how much you can tell that he has heard of Colonel Washington, and his description of him is amazing. He's never met the man, but he knows of what he's done in the past, and he respects him. And he goes into detail about his house, the way his house appears, the whole landscape, the neighbors along that area. Burnaby later arrives at Alexandria, and he goes into detail about Alexandria, about how it's a very important trading post. And he describes the people there and what they're doing. And he also describes what they're wearing, what they, as they pull into Alexandria, what they have for trade, what they're carrying with them. After this, he travels back to Williamsburg, and Burnaby would embark on another trip in May of 1760. And from this point in May, he travels again to Fredericksburg. He offers more detail. And by May 31st, he arrives at Winchester, and he reaches a ferry crossing the Shenandoah River at a place that he wants to actually measure. So he measures it, and he says, the place where I crossed is 100 yards wide. And he goes further, and he says, I don't feel that the Shenandoah River is not much wider than that all the way through. Just a very objective view of traveling in Virginia in 1760. As a researcher, that's what you want. You also, oftentimes we find diaries that are filled with I don't know, close personal connections with families, mainly talking, if they're objective, they're mainly talking about the weather or the road conditions. This Burnaby's diary is one of the few diaries that goes into detail about the people and the surroundings, and that's what I'm after. That is what I'm after. So, how can you find this? The name of it is Travels Through the Middle Settlements in North America in the years 1759 and 1760 by Reverend Andrew Burnaby, Burnaby. You just type that in on archive.org and enjoy the reading. It's great. It's a great find. Okay. Let's see. Never heard of them. Oh, Ellie says she has rattlesnake root on her property. Good for you, girl. Can't wait to read this, as I have many ancestors who traveled in this period. Yeah, it is. It's one of the great. There are many, many diaries and journals and manuscripts out there that offer details about specific areas and specific time frames. His is one of the best. I like it, the way that he just kept it objective and just wrote about what he saw and what he heard. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any questions, let me know. Like I said, we're gonna shoot for getting everything done for April. I'm not going to say what the topic could be for the next live stream. We'll let that be a surprise too. We'll see how April goes. I think it'll all go well. Nancy says, thanks so much for all you do for us. Thank you. You're from South Georgia. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for your support and your patience, all your kind words. Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next live stream will be April the 27th at 7:30 p.m. And until then, I wish you all good luck, best wishes on your journey to the past, and may God bless.